for being here for this really exciting panel about accessibility. We have some phenomenal speakers with us today, and all of you in the room as well, because accessibility is a journey. We're all on an accessibility journey, and we'll talk about that. That'll be the theme. I wanted to introduce myself very quickly. My name is Andrew Leary. I'm a principal at the Coraggio Group. We're a strategy consulting firm in the United States that focuses on destination stewardship, accessibility, economic development, and all the intersections that destination management brings together, particularly in the US market. I'd like to take a quick poll in the room. So we're not going to use Slido for this session. So if you do have questions, we will do an extensive question and answer, because we want this to be a conversation with everybody. So please think about your questions and write them down. But I just want to take an informal poll. Please raise your hand if accessibility is something that is new for you in your career. Few hands have gone up. That's great. Welcome to your accessibility journey. Raise your hands if accessibility has been a part of your career for some time, and you're in the middle of figuring out what it looks like. A few more hands go up. That's great. We want this to be a really welcoming environment, so no question is too big or too small. And our panelists here are going to do a really great job at providing some context about what this means. What is accessibility? How does it relate to GSTC and the standards that are so crucial to helping us make good, informed decisions? I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists to you. They'll be able to share more about their individual stories, of course. To my left is Heng, who's an accessibility and inclusive travel expert, drawing on a rich background of professional experience and personal resilience. To his left is Dr. Leary, who's an associate professor focused on sustainable tourism management at Southern Oregon University in the United States. To her left is Vacant, CEO of SG Enabled, the leading disability and inclusion agency here in Singapore. And last but certainly not least is Heng, who founded Planet Able, a globally recognized and awarded travel brand that promotes inclusive travel for persons with disabilities and the elderly. Would you please welcome our panelists. Martin, I'd like to turn it over to you first, and I think many people's entry points into the world of accessibility is creating more enabled environments, physical environments. But I wonder, is it more than that?
It is indeed more than that. Maybe I'll ask you to
Sure.
Absolutely, it is more than that. And I'll just share some of my journey to kind of, can we go back? I'll just share some of my journey, which will lead you to my first slide. I've got very, very few slides, only two which have any content on, frankly. I have been a career editor from when I left university, pretty much. I was a traveller as well from a very, very young age. I did my first overseas journey from the UK to France on my bicycle when I was 16 years old. I did a lot of travelling. I travelled for 10 years in Asia and Central America, and landed up in Melbourne, Australia, where I discovered that that was where the headquarters of Lonely Planet was. And of course, you know, it was a marriage made in heaven, an editor, a traveller at Lonely Planet. And I eventually became Lonely Planet's editorial manager in charge of editorial design, layouts, basically in charge of the production of all Lonely Planet's guidebooks for about 7 years. And I thought that was the pinnacle of my career. I thought that was, oh wow, what more could you possibly want? And then in 2010, I was cycling to work 200 kilometers a week, round trip every week for 10 years. In 2010, I had a road accident and broke my neck and became a quadriplegic. And I spent the next year in rehab, and I started to think about, well, I've never ever thought about traveling with a disability. And this is what the heading in Lonely Planet guidebooks was, travel with a disability. A token paragraph in some of the guidebooks about travel with a disability. And that's how I saw it at that time. I spent the next year during rehab actually educating myself And I started on the journey and realized very quickly that travel with a disability was only the tip of the iceberg. Eventually I got back to my job as editorial manager. I lasted a few months before the company was sold, restructured, and I got a new job as accessible travel manager for London, which I held at position for, which I held for 7 years as well. And on my journey, I was very, very lucky to be have several mentors. Simon Darcy from the University of Technology in Sydney, the world's leading academic, the late great Scott Rains, who was the pioneer of inclusive travel, and numerous other people. The head of Ivor Ambrose, who's the European Network for Accessible Tourism, the world's leading NGO in the field. And I started to realize that it wasn't travel with a disability, it was actually more than that. It was, we were talking much more about accessibility more generally. So I persuaded Leary first of all to change it from travel with a disability to accessible travel. As I continued on my journey, I realized that even accessible travel really wasn't cutting it. Because in my experience, I began to realize that this focus on accessibility was really this focus on the built environment. The built environment being both general and the built environment that is both general and specific accessible facilities offered by tourism service providers. This, of course, is really important. It's particularly important for people like myself with mobility issues. However, it's not enough just to have facilities that are accessible. You also need to have access to those facilities. So another important pillar is accessible transport. I made the mistake once of stopping off in Brunei where I had an accessible hotel, but there were no accessible attractions and no accessible transport options at all. Completely wasted journey. I had a week in a hotel. So transport also extremely important. Also, we're not talking just about the physical environment. Any traveller's journey, no matter whether you have access needs or not, it starts almost always on the internet. So it's also really, really important to have accessible ICT for both planning and booking purposes. And continuing on that journey, I realised also, talking to people and through personal experience, that there's also something else missing, and that's attitudinal. So it's all very well to talk about the hard things, the infrastructure and the transport. It's also all very well to talk about the digital accessibility, very important. But I think what most people don't realise is that a positive attitude is actually one of the most important aspects of making travel more accessible to people with access needs. And that's not just people with disability, but particularly people who might not regard themselves as disabled, but who are ageing into disability. And with an ageing demographic in the world, 1 in 6 trips next year being taken by international trips next year being taken by a retiree aged 60 years and over, and the world's population of age reaching, say, 2 billion in 2030, it's becoming increasingly important to be catering to that demographic too. So, I was commissioned, the disability, Valuable 500 is a collective of 500 of the world's most valuable or important companies. Among them, these 15 iconic companies that you see on the screen there. In addition to those, you have many, many travel-related companies such as Expedia, Trivago, all the Virgin brands, numerous airports, and they have committed to ending disability exclusion, and they commissioned a report, a survey in 2021, 3,500 people in 5 territories, and asked them, what is the best way, do you think, of finding out what disabled people want when they travel? That's by asking them. So this was a major study. I was asked to write a report on the 10 most accessible cities as voted by them, but I also got access to their data sets. And this is an average across all 5 territories. What's important to a disabled traveller? It's not infrastructure. What's important to a disabled traveller in order is being treated with kindness and respect. Staff who understand my needs. These are so, so important. And this goes under positive attitude. And this is where we move beyond accessibility to inclusion. So that's why I talk now about inclusive travel. It's inclusive, not only, it's inclusive of all people, which is Simon Darcy's whole of life approach. So travel service providers need to provide services to everybody from babies to people who are 99 years and over. And with all the different abilities or limitations that they may have as toddlers or as senior citizens. So being treated with kindness and respect and people who understand my needs is really, really important. And also a high percentage lamented a lack of contact information. So we need to know information, we need to know plan before we go. If somewhere is not accessible, we can't go. If we don't know that it's not accessible, we probably won't go either. If somewhere is accessible and we still don't know about it, we won't go. So it's not a question of just something being accessible. It's not a question of build it and they will come. Build it, tell us about it, then it will come. So that's why 30% want more access information on websites, and 40% of people want to be able to speak to someone who can answer their accessibility questions accurately and confidently. So what do you look for in a travel agent or travel provider? And this is where I got the data. This is just from the USA. I can't actually read from here, but this basically retells the story of what the previous slide says. Physical accommodations are really important, but they're not nearly as important as disability awareness, people who understand the needs of people with access needs, and also being treated with an open mind, and having people being flexible enough to say, how can I make your stay more comfortable? That's a very, very simple thing. The travel industry is nothing if not the service industry. So when I arrive somewhere, or if somebody with access needs arrives somewhere, the best way to cater to that person's needs is just to ask them, how can I make your stay more comfortable? What can I do to make your stay more comfortable? To listen to them, and to be open-minded, and then to act on what they say. Because the important thing to remember is, anybody with an access need or disability, they are the experts in their own needs. Nobody knows better than they what they need and how their needs can be met. So all wheelchair users are not created equal. Every wheelchair user also has unique abilities and functional abilities and limitations. And only they know what those are. So if you want to be able to cater to people with access needs, whether or not they regard themselves as disabled or not, because most people aging into disability won't regard themselves as disabled. If you want to be able to cater to this demographic, simply ask and show understanding and empathy, and that goes so much further than simply providing ramps and accessible toilets.
Thank you for setting that stage for us, Martin. And I think what's so interesting about inclusive and accessible travel is that when we desire to have these supports and communities to welcome visitors, we're also enabling our residents who are there too, who might have accessibility needs, where the need for inclusion is long overdue in our own communities. So by focusing on travelers, we're also focusing on our residents as well, and building this community-led opportunity in front of us.
Absolutely.
But there are challenges which we can turn into opportunities. And Pavlina, I think the academia plays such an important role to help us make empirical-based decisions about where do we go, what could we do, what shouldn't we do, And I think accessibility and inclusion is no different. And so I wonder if you could share with us some of those opportunities and challenges that you're seeing right now in the work and research that you're conducting.
Well, hello, everybody. Again, my name is Dr. Paulina McGrady. I am a professor at Southern Oregon University. So I added a map there. If anybody wants to know where Oregon is, it's that little green spot. It's right above California, where most people know about. And I'm in Ashland, which is the little red dot on the bottom, so right by the border with California. A little bit about me before I answer kind of the question. I have been in the sustainable tourism field for 20 years really now, started when I was 5. And in terms of accessible tourism, maybe in the last 6 or 7 years, I think really became kind of focused in the tourism industry. And my research has been focused on challenges and opportunity from the business perspective. Of course, I had to read a lot of literature of what travelers with disabilities need, but I recently did a study on challenges and opportunities from the tourism business perspective. I work with Travel Oregon, which is the destination management organization in Oregon, and through a grant from Travel Oregon, I conducted this study recently in Southern Oregon. So I'll share just a couple of slides, highlights from that study. So we did 30 visits of different tourism businesses in Southern Oregon specifically, varying from museums, hotels, restaurants, outdoor outfitters, etc. And I guess one thing that's important to point out is that I've been doing this work with a colleague of mine, Dr. Rebecca Williams, who unfortunately was in an accident a few years back, and she uses a wheelchair currently, and she has been really key in helping me with this research. So I also surveyed businesses, so we did physical assessments where we would go and physically measure how tall is everything, how wide is the door, what's the chair like, what's the table, etc. And then we also had a survey that we shared with the business owner or manager to ask what are some of the challenges they face, what type of disabilities they see, etc. Then we did focus groups with community members, particularly tourism businesses, to get a little more in-depth information of what are some of those challenges and opportunities. And then currently we're wrapping up phase 3, so it's a pretty new study closing up in the next couple of months, where I'm hosting stakeholder meetings to share all the data that I have collected and kind of get final data and final insights from residents and business owners. And then our goal is to develop a resource base and guidelines, which I'll come back to in a moment. So a couple highlights from our study. In terms of challenges, I think that's what a lot of businesses face, making historic buildings accessible when we're talking about mobility, accessible in terms of mobility impairments. In Ashland, Oregon, where I'm based out of, there are a lot of historic buildings, and I know that's the case in a lot of places around the world, where people say, well, I can't really add an elevator, or I can't even have a restroom, which is sometimes the restroom is on the 3rd floor or something like that. Sometimes really there is nothing you can do because that building is protected, because it's historic. But what I think is an opportunity is to maybe focus on different types of impairments, maybe not mobility. And one example of a local hotel where they're not really accessible at all in terms of mobility impairments, what they did is they have a statement on their website: we are very sorry that we cannot welcome you if you have mobility impairment, but here are 2 hotels down the street which are accessible. Please feel free to stay there. So also kind of collaborative spirit. Uneven sidewalks, cobblestones. I know those are very prominent in Europe especially. You can't really do much about that. Outdoor spaces, obviously extremely difficult, specifically for physical mobility. Transportation options, Martin already mentioned. Limited parking, accessible parking with the aging population. A big part of the visitor in Ashland and Southern Oregon are baby boomers, retired people, if not in a wheelchair, with canes or walkers, etc. So a lot of accessible parking is needed. Of course, everybody shared funding issues, lack of time. I really don't have time to deal with that. I don't have capacity. I don't have people. We'll come back to that. Lack of formal staff training, I think that's the major one, which I highlighted in red here. This is what everybody shared. To quote somebody I interviewed, they said, "We don't know what we don't know." So there's a lot of need for training and a lot of expertise needed. And lack of information. Everybody is interested to have one website or booklet or whatever it is to have information of providers, of training materials, etc. In terms of opportunities, collaborations are key. There's more and more grants available. There's opportunities from the DMOs, from state level, and beyond large international organizations. So there's opportunities to maybe participate in grants applications with medical facilities or work with retirement homes where there's expertise. Sharing resources is another kind of example. Again, these are findings from my interviews and surveys. There's a lot more. Sharing resources, having one idea was, for a ramp, maybe not everybody has the money, but have one in a centralized location and share that. Blog posts, having specific blog posts, regardless of how accessible you are, to talk about your journey as a destination and accessibility. Updating websites, obviously, Martin already mentioned that information is really a bigger barrier than physical barriers. So this is coming up in my studies as well. Another thing that I think is very pronounced everywhere when we talk about impairments and accessibility, the first thing that comes to mind is mobility impairment. But unfortunately, the number of people with invisible and silent disabilities is really fast growing, and there is a lot of lack of information and understanding what that means and what we can do to make everybody included. Research is lacking, so I have plans to continue this work. There are some studies, but not as much as there should be, I think, currently. A lot of the businesses that I talk to say, okay, we have to really talk about that, and not only when we have that one focus group or one stakeholder meetings, but make it an agenda item during our bi-weekly or monthly meeting and make those small steps that we heard about in terms of sustainability in the morning as well. And then industry newsletter. I sit on the board of Travel Southern Oregon, which is our regional destination management organization, and luckily I have the support of Travel Southern Oregon to add bits and pieces, a little education on the industry newsletters to kind of start the conversation at least. And then my last slide here, a few more highlights of things that came out as opportunities. A few destinations, smaller regions, decided that they'll do monthly lunch and learn, where they'll meet for lunch. There will be announced, okay, there will be a meeting every third Wednesday at noon in the library if you want to come, and there will be a different expert. One day it will be focusing on autism, another day, different topics. Building an itinerary around accessible businesses is obviously another opportunity. One area came up with 10 places to visit in whatever town if you're in a wheelchair, or 5 restaurants that are visually impaired friendly and things like that. A centralized place for businesses to get information. Everybody needs that, and we're working on that. And then most importantly, I think progress over perfection. Everybody feels overwhelmed and says, it's so big and so unknown that I really don't know what to do, so I just don't do anything. So starting small and having those kind of regular bits and pieces add up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. McGrady. You can go that way. So I think one thing I heard is that when it comes to challenges and opportunities, when we are deploying accessible and inclusive travel into our destinations or journeying to do that, it's not finding the one big switch to hit and then it all works. The community doesn't operate like that. It's a lot of little levers and buttons and things that we can pull, community members that we can invite in, and we can step back and listen to community members as well. It takes time to build this up, but that time is really important and crucial, and there are many destinations across the globe that have been going down this journey. And so I think for all of us, it's always great to see and hear and experience what's been going so well. And Singapore is one of those destinations where things have been going really well. Gakbun, I think for me personally, one of the most powerful things about a conference like this is the community that welcomes us this week. This is my first time in Singapore. Anybody else's first time in Singapore? Few hands. Well, for those of you who are journeying here this week, for returning, the community's welcoming us while we're here. And it's been so great. And so I wonder if you could share some of the work that SG Enable is doing to contribute to a more accessible vision for Singapore.
I think I skipped a slide. Let me just get back to, do we go this way? I skipped a few slides. Good afternoon. I'm learning a lot just listening to the three of you, and I'm sure later on, Niha as well. So let me start with a story about this building. We are all talking about sustainability, sustainable tourism, but this picture is one of my favorites. And in case you've got school-going children who have just completed their GC O-level exams, this picture was used for the geography exam where they needed to trace some words. So just wanted to share that this is Enabling Village. It's a sustainable use of an old school building. The school building was constructed sometime in early 70s. So by now it's half a century old. And you would see that from a slope that is really not of much use, it has been cleverly recreated, transformed into this outdoor terrace, or we call it amphitheater, where we do movie screenings and so on and so forth, with ramps that are very family-friendly for both wheelchair users as well as family with children, using prams. This is really the story about Enabling Village. While a lot of it has gone into making it meet accessibility standards, because the Building Construction Code, Authorities Code for Accessible Buildings, came only in the 80s. So this building obviously didn't, was born 30 years before the code. But we used this opportunity and we saw that this is a very important story, very important milestone for us to repurpose an old building, give it a new lease of life, but more importantly, drive that transformative impact in social inclusion, in community building. That's really what we are after. So this is where the story of SG Enable starts, because our office obviously is in this village. So let me just go next to this frame that I will use to kind of guide the next few minutes that I have is really about access. So I thought that will help us kind of frame our thinking and our sharing a little bit. So let me start with the first letter, that's advocate. So what do we do in SG Enable? One of the key roles that we see ourselves playing in SG Enable, and we are only 10, 11-year-old. We were set up in 2013. The village was officially launched by then Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong in 2015. So it's a very short history. We saw ourselves really as an advocate for disability inclusion in Singapore. And that is very important. In that whole ecosystem, you need to have a voice. You need to have an advocate. And you can break it down into different levels. So in a company or in an industry, you also need that voice and that advocacy. These pictures that you see here, if you have traveled, I think some of you might have recognized some of the buildings. This is where Marina Bay Sands is, and we were gathered there, 500 of us, people with and without disabilities, doing one thing. We're trying to communicate through a song called Our Story. I'm not about to sing, but I thought that we commissioned this song to celebrate SG Enable's 10th anniversary of working with the social service sector, working with the community, working with the government, and so on and so forth, businesses, to create a more inclusive society. But one verse or one particular lyrics that kind of really moved me, and I would say anchor the kind of work that we are doing, and I also think it would be something that would resonate with you, otherwise you won't be in this room. It's, let compassion be our pride. What is compassion? Compassion is actually, you can look up the dictionary, kindness, etc., but it's an emotional response when you feel empathy. So for disability inclusion, we are saying that globally, we have moved from apathy, where people don't care, don't seem to think very much about inclusion, to sympathy, where you feel pity, and that's really not the right attitude, where Martin was talking about positive attitude. Empathy is where you could feel for someone else. But compassion is an emotional response where you also want to help, and giving help in a very respectful manner. I think you can do anything to all the buildings, the hardware, the software, and all that. Ultimately, it's the hardware that would make tourism, truly accessible. So that's advocacy that we do. Please go to YouTube and listen to that song, Our Story. If not, I'll get the organizers to help us play that. Sorry, we're going a bit fast again. So the next one is collaborate. We collaborate with a lot of partners, industry partners. So Ascot is here, Fraser's. Just to share with you, the first picture on the left that you see this lady who is, hugging the tree. Now, that whole experience came from the Enabling Village, where we piloted a place-making initiative with people from Hong Kong. So my point here is we all have our experiences, and we want to kind of accelerate this whole journey and latch on that silver wave, the purple wave, whatever waves we call that. This is the way to work, where we collaborate and we share ideas. So we took the idea from Hong Kong, they came, piloted in the Enabling Village, placemaking using tactile guides for persons with visual impairment, and that is deployed mainstream in Gardens by the Bay, where we're really thrilled that the people who are blind could hug the tree, could sense make, right? You're not just telling her, on your left, there's a tree, up 12 o'clock, there's this, but that whole interaction and experience. So that to us is important. Capability building, we also hear a lot about training, staff training and all that. So for that, we have attempted to do a few things. So first, we have a collaboration with Stark that is a spin-off from the university. So we did a design playbook for inclusive spaces, and our partner here, Ascot, for example, referenced that playbook when they wanted to refurbish some of their facilities to make it more accessible and friendly. E-accessibility for this playbook for digital inclusion. So the app, each time you put on something, don't assume everybody can access and read it. What about someone who is blind? And so you need to do the user testing with their needs in mind. We run courses like consumer inclusive training courses for businesses, for employers, by our academy, known as Enabling Academy. All right? Can't go through everything, but I'll just explain briefly. The next letter here is experiences. So what are travelers or tourists after? I think you are all experts here, given that this is GSTC. It is about the experience that we can help to create, memories that we can create with them. So I think that I want to acknowledge Sentosa's effort. So Sentosa is one of our strategic MOU partner, and we signed the MOU to work on key outcomes, and this is one of them, where you have the beach track to enable wheelchair users to go into the water. We're not given the chance to show the video, but if you were to hear the laughter and the response, I think you would agree with me, these are the memories that are worth creating. So sustainability through inclusivity, that's the next pillar that we want to talk about. We should be seeing sustainable tourism, sustainability, from that inclusion lens. All right? The two, accessibility and inclusion, they are pillars that will reinforce and create greater outcomes. So the last slide that I have is really the support for businesses. Now, business, you are P&L driven, inevitable, right? But there are support if you are in Singapore or even overseas. These are the supports that you get. Enabling Guide is where we will advertise or tell people, tell the end users, persons with disabilities, their caregivers, where to find accessible, inclusive destinations. So we help to publish. We have the Enabling Mark, which is an accreditation framework to help employers become more inclusive and sustainable. And of course, just a bit of advertisement time. If you see that laptop, there is a Zero project that's happening end of the month, 28th and 29th. So the first day is a conference with friends from Vienna, and we have delegates, 50 different delegates from all around the world, Asia Pac largely. And the day 2 is really going to explore inclusive spaces in Singapore. So if you happen to have the time or the chance to come back, please do that. I think one of us mentioned that it is a continuous learning. It's not just once a year kind of effort. So with this, I end my sharing.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think what's so amazing about the work that you and your team do with the community here in Singapore is that it's not just one thing. Sometimes when we think about accessibility or sustainability or inclusion, it's something that we add into the work that we do as a line item in our budget. But line items in our budget can go away very quickly. That one thing can be taken out of our organizational chart very easily. But what you described is almost like a woven mat. You can't remove just one thread. You'd have to remove the whole mat. And so for SG Enable, which is very focused on inclusion and accessibility, it's fantastic to see that. And I think it's an example of, for all of us, even if our organizations are not mission focused on accessibility and inclusion in the same way that SG Enable is, it's an opportunity to say, how can we weave this into what we do so that if the budget line item goes away, accessibility and inclusion does not go away? How do we make sure it stays within our organizations? And sometimes that can be a really daunting task to think about because, again, we're all on our different journeys about what accessibility is. And whether we're starting our journey or in the middle of it, we need entry points sometime. We need re-entry points sometime. Neha, I wonder if you could share with us some of those entry points that you see for all of us that we could tap into so that we have a more accessible and more inclusive tourism market ahead of us.
Do you guys mind if I stand? I'm a little more comfortable talking standing. So tapping into the inclusive tourism market. So a little bit about Planetable. It's been a 9-year-long journey now. We have been a service provider, a consultant to the industry, and trying to build an ecosystem where accessibility is more mainstream rather than something on the side like, hey, we do something for them. you know, but we all are them and we all are us. So that attitude of all of us who will be impacted by accessibility, the need for accessibility at some point in our life is the goal. We also use that experience of creating those experiences to help the industry become better, build their capacity and competency so that ultimately they don't need us. That's the goal. So why we do what we do? So here is a picture, and this is a picture of Singapore, of my parents. So my father is blind and mother is a wheelchair user. So I just come with 40 years of experience, my age, of living with the needs of accessibility and working into it. And we never traveled as a family, I never traveled, and my parents didn't travel until a few years ago. That's what led me to start this journey to make travel accessible for me, for my family, and for anyone like us. But who are these people? So we are 15 to 20% of the world population, which is 1.3 billion people who need accessibility, and over 1 billion people over 60, and 46% of them have a disability. So just some of the patterns, these people actually pay a 30% more. Their average spend is 30% more than a non-disabled traveler. And when their location meets their expectation, they are your repeat customers. So your cost of acquiring a customer goes down substantially. And who are these people? So when we talk of disability or accessibility, it's always a picture of a wheelchair user comes to our mind. But in addition to that, there are people with visual impairment, who are deaf or hard of hearing, with cognitive, psychosocial, learning, sensory, intellectual, or other invisible disabilities, or people with medical conditions like cancer or who are on dialysis for that matter, and people with temporary disabilities as well. So we have over 100,000 museums all over the world. We have over 700,000 accommodations all over the world, like the hotels, which have 16 million hotel rooms. But when we talk about they being accessible, what percentage of them? It's not even 5%. So imagine 15 to 20% of the population needs accessibility, but less than 5% of these establishments are really accessible. So these people hold $13.1 trillion of annual disposable income. And we are not creating products and services for them with the money that is waiting to be spent. So like Martin mentioned that all of the transactions are mostly done online. So like 68% of them are done online, but are the websites accessible? Is the travel content accessible? Is your social media content accessible while you're posting? So no, we are not consciously thinking about that, and we need to work on that. It's not just physical infrastructure, but your digital communication, information, and human accessibility. So it's a huge market gap and it's not just leisure travel that we're talking about. We are talking the MICE travel, the business travel, the sports travel, like all of these sports events, like the Olympics that happen. Imagine the thousands of people that are traveling for these events. So why the industry hasn't looked into it yet? The question is lack of awareness, lack of optimum resources or appropriate resources and training that can enable the competency of the people in the workforce. The size of the market hasn't been realized. It is just not, yes, we are talking about the market size, but we're still not talking enough about it, let's put it that way. And even if some of the organizations who have invested before into accessibility, they haven't found the optimum way to reach to the market, so there has not been enough return of investment. So this is a high-performance assessment that we did at the United Nations Vienna last year, where we got stakeholders from the industry, from developed nations and developing nations, and people with all types of disabilities into one room, that even if we have the laws out there, we have the compliances out there, why people with disabilities are still having bad experiences while they are traveling. So if you see the There is a huge gap in between what an organization or a destination claims to be that we are accessible and what the expectations of the traveler are. So there is a huge wide gap, and we have to work together to fill in that gap. So this is the business case, like I earlier mentioned. It's not just leisure travel, it's business, MICE, sports. And even when we are talking about this 15 to 20%, the market is still growing. We have the aging population. We have hundreds of thousands of people living with long COVID who are still not recognized as disabled, but are disabled. We have wars going on all over the world where we are increasing exponentially the number of disabled people around us. And there is more recognition around what is considered as a disability. So I was diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years ago. I didn't know it till then. So more and more awareness is going around that. So what does accessibility in tourism really means? It's training, it's communication, it's integration of assistive technology solutions, human accessibility, and information and accessible formats for all. So I'll rush through it because we are running out of time. So where do we go from there? We talked about the market, we talked about the challenges. So destinations and businesses first should start by acknowledging that they have to do more. Even if they are doing something, they have to do more. And they need to have a holistic approach around it, not just, oh, we focus on these many disabilities at the moment, and we'll look at the others later. Because, of course, there is intersectionality involved. There are people who live with multiple disabilities. So like my father, who has been blind for 60 years, has been wearing a hearing aid also for 10 years. And with age, there is cognitive loss and low mobility. So there are people who live like that, and then when we talk of intersectionality with LGBTQ travel, women travel, senior travel, like there's no end to it. Recognize that there is a difference between developed nations and developing nations. So anything that we do on a global level is very developed nation focused. But then you have to recognize that both can learn from each other. Both have their good things and the bad things, and anything that you do, you kind of harmonize it in your strategy so that you have the best model in place. Separate business model for each type of business is important. So what works for a hotel might not work for a museum. You need to have a different kind of strategy aligned to the goals. Because a museum, which is government funded, their goal might not be money making. Their goal is access. But for a hotel, the goal is money making. So you need to build your roadmap around that. And of course, data-driven insights and API integrations so that whatever information that we have available is shared across through collaborations and partnerships. And the customer and the workforce go hand in hand. So we have been talking about disabled travelers as a market. But we have to also keep in mind that including people with disabilities in the tourism workforce is equally important. Because then you have self-representation in the industry. They are their self-advocates at the best. And not just in blue-collar jobs. They have to be in the leadership positions, making decisions for themselves and their community. So then it's like so ingrained in the fabric of your organization that you don't have to do something out of the ordinary. It's mainstreamed in there. Yeah. So this is the format of what a customer journey looks like. It does not start when a traveler reaches a destination. It starts when they think about traveling. Hey, I want to travel. They go online. Is the travel content accessible for them? Like, do I have enough access to information to make an informed decision and then go to a platform and book my travel? And this is when they land at a destination. Are the experiences inclusive for their disability and accessibility needs? And when they go back, is there a proper feedback loop that what they found missing is given back to the destination for improvement for future? This is an ideal version of inclusion in tourism, which has to be seamless, customer-centric, with quality experiences and adapted to their needs. We apply design thinking into inclusive travel. So by design thinking, we mean that is the industry capable enough to kind of respond when something which is not expected comes to them. So you can prepare yourself and train yourself for 10, 20 disability conditions, but there might certainly will be a situation you're not prepared for. But can you think on your toes and create a solution then and there? That is what design thinking strategy means in inclusive travel. So sustainable development goals, we have mapped it to 7 goals across various aspects when it comes to the tourism industry. Where can you start? As a business, as a destination, evaluate where you are, build a roadmap, allocate the resources, and build a holistic plan for accessibility. It sounds like simple, but yes, it would be a long journey once you start taking that. How can we help? We can help you build that roadmap, your policy, in your auditing, training, and consultation, of course, and implementation and outreach, so that your proper impact metrics are identified and you have your return of investment, because ultimately it's about the business. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha.
Transferring the control to you to take the conversation.
Great. And now this conversation becomes this entire room, because you all are experts in what you do as well. And there are voices that are here with us, there are voices that are not here with us. And so we're going to be able to spend some time about the next 20 minutes, starting with question and answer, but hopefully transitioning into conversation. So I wonder, does anybody have a question for our panelists to get this conversation going? And if you wouldn't mind, maybe if you're able to stand up and say who you are when you ask your question, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Patrick Keane. I'm with Climate Impact Partners based in London. Just a question on standards. There are a lot of international standards, ISO standards, British standards, ADA in the US. And I'm wondering if there's consensus building around standards and what you see in the market as far as coming together, are on the same road as maybe the tourism industry, where GSTC is taking a lead. What's happening in standards and accessibility?
I can answer that one. There is a major problem in that every different country has different building codes, different standards. Every country has a varying ability to enforce those building codes, or actually has the resources to implement those building codes. So in 2021, a number of organizations and experts got together and released the ISO in accessible tourism, which does set international standards. It costs very little. It costs like 200 odd Swiss francs. And increasingly, there are guidances being released for different sectors of the tourism market by the International Standards Organization. So there's MICE, there's retail guidelines, there's MICE guidelines, accommodation guidelines related to the ISO, which are progressively being released. So yes, there is an international standard. Yes, it is being increasingly supported.
I'll add to that. So yes, there are laws in different countries, and US has been at the helm of it because the ADA has been around for 34 years already, but still there is improvement needs to be done. So even if there are standards, until and unless the focus moves from legal compliance to customer-centric aspiration of catering to a disabled customer, we will still be having problems, because everyone is just trying to save themselves from a legal issue. They really do not care about a disabled traveler. And a lot of times, like the ISO standard, again, it's great that we have that, but again, it has the challenges of being interpretation, like how do you interpret the ISO standard? So then we need more and more experts all over the world which can kind of customize the interpretation as per the demographic and the various cultural aspects of the country. Because like I said, like it's a whole different world when we talk of developed nations, and it's a whole different world when we talk of developing countries. So the challenges, the solutions are all very different.
And I just had a real quick comment to add to that, from my experience when I was going and really measuring and checking according to ADA standards, there were many cases where, yes, they were within the allotted number, however, it was not really functionally accessible.
Yes.
So I like the term functional accessibility, where Yes, it checks the ADA requirement, but it's not like my colleague who was in a wheelchair was not able to go in some space, especially depending on what wheelchair you have and all of that. So I think the best thing that can do, obviously, check the standards. I'm not saying they're bad, but I think the better practice is to have a person with disability test your product or service. Have a person in a wheelchair go through your hotel room. Have a blind person walk through your museum or whatever it is. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, that people with disabilities are not included in the strategic planning for businesses and services.
Co-design. But is the catchphrase at the moment, co-design, which means not just consultation, but actually including your target group, in this case, people with access needs, in the design of your products and services. And I'd like to reiterate again what Neha was saying. It's not about compliance. Get away from this compliance mentality and start practicing some empathy.
To add into this, because I think there are, at least, there are some policies and standards that are hard to adapt and make custom to the community that we're trying to serve. Others, we have an opportunity. GSTC has several standards around accessibility. Gokbun, I wonder if you could share, are there any specific adaptations or innovations that you all have developed to localize GSTC's accessibility standards effectively here in Singapore?
Yeah, sure. So I think at current state, Singapore is probably the only one country that has gotten the full accreditation as a country accreditation, country kind of destination, complying with the GSTC global standards. So my wish is for, travel, you need counterparts. So the wish is for more countries to adopt and adapt some of these standards over time. In our case, we have adopted them, obviously, in the enabling village. Not that we started out thinking that we will be a tourist destination. We started out just with the intention that this place has to be meaningful, has to be a place for social inclusion. And it can, therefore, become a microcosm for a more inclusive Singapore. And with that experience that we have, of course, along the way, we also make mistakes, but you learn through those mistakes. And a key approach that we have taken, which we felt would give us that multiplier effect very quickly, is to connect with stakeholders and key industry partners. So in this case, with Ascot, with Fraser's property, where when the tourists come, besides the lodging, which obviously has to be accessible, what about the restaurants? And you can go down to what about the crockery? If someone has cerebral palsy or is not able to use to hold his or her glass, is there going to be a straw? And what kind of straws do you stand by for such a customer? So it is not just about the very basic, from the first mile to the last mile, from the airport to the hotel room. They are not here to be locked up in the hotel room. So there's a lot of, if you start unpacking, you literally have lots to do, but you can't do it yourself as a business. You need your service partners, you need other collaborators in this journey. So to share what Fraser's did, Fraser's property, they saw themselves as an inclusive employer, so they set inclusion targets for themselves to hire, to train themselves and to hire. But beyond that, they also see that they have an opportunity to bring together their tenants, all the retail partners, and create a more inclusive and accessible shopping experience. So people with dementia, for example, people with autism, there are special shopping hours catering to their needs, where the lights are dimmer, it's quieter, it's an hour dedicated, and they can shop more comfortably. So are your stakeholders prepared to do some of these things? So it really depends on where you are in that whole stakeholder map. And it doesn't quite matter where you are. You don't necessarily have to be at the top. The whole map requires people to play a part, and that's so interconnected. And Frasers also took it upon themselves to do training. So they will pay training providers to have structured training for their retail partners, so that they can serve customers with disabilities or with mobility challenges better.
I think relationship maps are so important for this work, for sustainability, really for all the work that we seek to do in our communities where we want to affect positive change. I wonder for all our colleagues in the room, would anybody like to share who have been some of your most important collaborators on your accessibility journey with your organization? Would anybody like to share? Nobody? Please.
Yeah, just very quickly, the UNDP in Thailand has done some really good work on inclusive travel and peoples with disabilities. So some very good work there.
Thank you for sharing. I'll say in the United States where I come from, some of the most important collaborators have been the local voices who can help to shape policy and make change from the ground up. That mindset is particularly important in the United States right now, shaping things from the ground up and not from the top down. So local voices that have been at the table, local voices that have never been at the table before. Who are the people we seek to work with we've never actually had conversations with? And how can we show up in those spaces where they are? Because I think it's important to go beyond just email and digital access, but how can we show up and be a part of the communities we seek to work with?
I think that's the question.
Oh, sorry, missed the hand. Thank you.
Hello, hi, I'm Rohaya. I'm from Mandai Wildlife Group, and I'd like to share just a little bit about our journey, because we work with SG Enable. And in fact, I visited SG Enable Village, the enabling village, about 2 to 3 weeks back, and I'm really amazed because, you know, I grew up with those kind of schools, the old schools, and I'm really amazed at how you have transformed the schools using sustainable elements. You have old containers that you bring into the school, and there's so much greenery. I took a photo, and I showed it to someone, and I said, where do you think this is? It looks like a resort, actually, because there's so much greenery. Anyway, just to let you know that we really learn, Mandai, we are trying to include this accessibility in tourism. We operate the wildlife parks, right? And for now, we are actually working with SG Enable to see how we can bring in employees, to how we can actually cater for employees who are disabled. And we really find that your resources, you know, the knowledge that you share is very useful, and the courses. So I think the next thing that we're thinking of doing is also looking at it from the tourism aspect, from our guests, right? Those guests who are disabled, how they come and how our own employees can cater to these guests. So I understand that you have such a training, and we are actually very eager to participate in that training. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to work together.
It's great when collaborators are in the same room at a global conference together. Thank you.
The neighboring village, if I may add, is truly inclusive. When it first opened, we greeted hornbills. We had, to today, we still have otters, whom we don't quite fancy because they eat up my fish. And we have tortoise, we have all sorts of animals. The whole concept we wanted was to bring a park into the community. So, and the architects, Waha, took a lot of consideration of the needs of persons with intellectual disabilities, persons with autism, because that space is an inclusive community space with a strong focus on training and employability of persons with disabilities. So they spend a lot of time in the village, and we have to make it very comfortable. And I think one benefit that we didn't quite expect and we didn't plan for that outcome was that it also became a very strong kind of recruitment or retention, staff retention factor. When the place, you walk out of the place feeling, okay, it's all right, and you come back in because you're welcomed by such a community.
Absolutely. So we're almost at the end of our session today. This conversation continues beyond this session, of course, but I want to ask one more question of all of our panelists, same question. With the 5 minutes we have left that we'll share, and I'll start, Martin, you. What one piece of advice would you give to people who are worried about serving the accessible and inclusive travel market?
We had this progress, not perfection line, and what I'd say is don't worry about being accessible being fully accessible. That's completely impossible. Whatever you can do, do. But the most important first step you can make is to assess your product, service, or venue for its accessibility. Make sure that you are, and make sure that you have all that information available in as many formats as possible, particularly online, so that people can judge for themselves whether your product, service, or venue is suitable for them. That's the very first step anybody should take in any field, in any business.
Great, thank you, Martin. Pavlina, same question for you. What piece of advice would you give to people who are worried about serving the accessible and inclusive travel market?
Well, obviously what Martin said is the easiest first step. I think another easy step than building an elevator or something like that is include people with disabilities. I know in my study a lot of businesses shared, oh, we need experts to teach us and all of that, but there are people with disabilities in every community, so reach out and engage them in those conversations and acknowledge, not just use them as free labor or whatever we want to call it. So find your people with disabilities in your community and engage them in your, have them test your product, your service, include them in the strategic planning, include them in the conversations, and I think that's really easy to start off with. Yep.
And I'll add one more layer to that. If you are able to compensate people for their time.
Yeah.
Absolutely, really important.
The same as working with indigenous communities. It's the same as working with communities, people with accessibility and inclusion needs and focus. So if you're able to lead with compensation, people's time is very important and valuable. Dr. Boone, same question.
So I've got, I echo what Martin and what you have said earlier about inclusion, but I thought I want to leave you with the vision of enabling village. Our tagline is building dreams, enabling lives. So I think you have something similar in your psyche or your concept or your vision of your business. It's really about how you enable lives. Everything starts with the attitude. And I think if you embrace persons with disabilities just as any of your customer segment, then you don't have to be overly anxious, but there has to also be intentional effort. So it's a little bit of it's a balance. You need to be intentional and also seek out whether you have really covered that whole customer base, like what Neha shared. In fact, the Canadian study that was just released this year talked about the global disability market to be about 5 billion, if you include friends and family that would consume, the global disability spending is 18 trillion. So there is a strong business case to do something good. So for me, it's really about starting with the right mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Neha?
So my friends have already covered a large part of what I wanted to say. But just to add, it's okay to be overwhelmed while you are trying to take that journey of inclusion and inclusive travel. But as much as you say, oh, we don't have the resources, I cannot make these changes. Remember that you do not need to have those resources to start, actually. You might say, oh, I need to have that bigger room and a toilet. Yes, it's important, but wheelchair users are less than 10% of the disabled population. So the rest 90% of the people have other sorts of disabilities. And for them to become accessible, you need much less financial and human resources than you might be overwhelmed with the idea of. So you can start there. It's not that you don't do it for wheelchair users. You will do that, but have a strategic step-by-step roadmap that whatever you have now, focus on what disabilities you can cater to today, and then move on to the ones that require more resources. And one more important point I'll add is, when you create for accessibility, when you create experiences, destinations, and products for people with disabilities, everyone's experiences get better. It's not only for disabled people. So if you have a ramp, it can be used not just by a wheelchair user, but by pregnant women, families with children in strollers, and people with heavy luggage, or old people. Or when you have an indoor navigation map for your resort, it not only helps a blind person, it helps any one of us who might be getting lost in this big hotel, it will help you as well. Or a chat-based room service will not only help a deaf or a hard of hearing person staying in a hotel, but will also help every one of us who don't like to talk on the phone anymore and use text more. So it's not just for disabled people. They just make your experiences better if you're accessible.
Well said. So this session was intended to create more space around these important conversations that have been going on long before this panel took place. And this conversation will continue long after we depart this room. But I'll just say for my closing thoughts, I hope that you are feeling more equipped to continue these conversations in the hall, when you go to dinner tonight, when you meet new colleagues, and how can you ask questions and engage in more of this, because it sometimes can feel very overwhelming, very similar to top-level sustainability. It can feel overwhelming, but there are a lot of great entry points, there's a lot of great perspectives here, and if we lead with kindness and empathy into everything that we do, then things are more attainable for us, especially around accessible and inclusive travel. I wanted to give one big thank you to all of our panelists. Could we give them a hand?